Good morning or good afternoon if you're, in England or Great Britain. The purpose of this podcast is to gather our gang together. You're the gal, and you have a child, and you just can't make ends meet. Well, there's a reason for that, and that's why we're trying to get you together. We want to know, for example, the gal who was making about $2,000 a month in her take-home pay, and she was in Cheers. She had to pay $1,600 in rent, and she had to come up with food, groceries, and another $700 or $800 in childcare, and it just doesn't work out, and it's not going to. And so we're going to gather our gang together, and as soon as you speak up, we can do something about it. Just to remind ourselves that there was a revolution that culminated in the 1970s here in the United States. We went from home economics to individual rights. The communists in the 1950s said they would overthrow the United States by about the year 1973, and they were spot on. That was the year of the highest standard of living as far as the average Joe is concerned. And from there, things fell apart. It fell into the lazy V. Remember, we have about 3 dozen anecdotes on our two YouTube channels. And so here we're just going to feel free to ramble in the good sense of the word, trying to get you to speak up and so we can do something about this. We're gathering our gang. There was home economics, and just to remind myself, home economics is when the married couple is viewed as a basic economic unit. You picture a 1950s detached house that was intentionally designed to live in. It's the opposite of poverty. There's poverty, and then there's home economics. It has a living room and a bedroom, and it's viewed as an economic unit. You picture that house, then go off to the side, start with farming and mining, manufacturing, wholesale, retail, and repair, and above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. And it's the Catholic Church, the Catholic priests that causes it to come into being to begin with. It's a God and country thing. It's the other intellectual position. It's a religious one, and that's where you get God and country. It's a Catholic thing. It requires the young couple or the living in it to practice virtues. They become a normal, well-adjusted person. Its race relegated to an endearing quality of appearance. These thoughts that have to do with sex have to do with actually getting the gal pregnant. So you take into account a sense of original sin. You become a good husband to a wife, and then good wife to a husband, and then you become a good father, and you become a good mother, which is where you're coming in. And then there's home economics, and you become a good citizen. One of the priorities is to get the next generation of children raised. And so being a mother is a profession. You're the gal, you have the identity of being a Yank. And so because God exists, the world centers around you and the guy. You're the very definition of what a Yankee is, a citizen of the United States is. And then you become a good mother. And so all the commercials, all the decisions are centered around you. You make them. I picture a young couple sitting in that house, and they're trying to choose between buying a couch or two recliner chairs, and then you can just daydream, and you can see all the farms, the kind of crops that are raised, and the kind of manufacturing, and then the kind of advertising, and whether or not they're stores or this delivered to the front door outfits. And it's all geared towards however you want, and you end up doing the decisions. And all of society, including the environment, is centered around you because you're centered around, you choose to arrange things to get to heaven after you die. There's something in you that's missing in the women's liberation movement. I hate the word love because it's been redefined so many times. But you can go on the computer and you can compare, listen to nuns' vocational stories, and you can just see the attitude and that difference. That's who you are. And so you've been shoved completely out of our society. We have to get you back. If you arrange the parameters of competition, so there'll be a large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. If you arrange the parameters of a competition, if you evolve a group of normal, well-adjusted people, then you'll start to have a group of normal, well-adjusted people. And that's who you are. But you just have to speak up. Picture that house again, and picture the 10-year-old trying to pay for his food and clothing. It just doesn't work out. And picture the gal taking care of that child. She can't do both. You can't take care of the little guy and go out and work other jobs, produce other things. It just doesn't happen. And if you're a guy, you can't take care of a kid or have a kid and go out and work in the factory that makes the couches and recliner chairs, makes the furniture. You can't be done. And so the two become one person in a very genuine sense of the word. And there you go. There you have it. You're as free as a human being is going to get. Your actions affect other people. And so if you practice virtues, then other people are made better off. If you practice vice, then you could be made better off and other people starve. And that's what happened in the 70s. That was our society. The revolution was in the 70s, and you can honestly say one of us is committing treason. It's not this camp. Just to say the words out loud, according to Aristotle and Plato and all those fanciest of fancy people, there's something missing. The highest standard of living you can have in this world, if there is no God and we just are all a bunch of chemicals and that sort of thing, the highest standard of living is to be a psychopathic nut, to live in the foothills. You do all the consuming and other people do all the producing. And if the world falls apart one day after you die, well, who cares? That's their problem. The highest standard of living is to be a psychopathic nut, and it's called the lazy V. Forgive me for talking with my hands. Picture the letter V on its side, and from about 1973, and you can see it going up and up and up, where these people, the people who did all the protesting for social values, were actually the ones that got into all the gold and real estate. They changed our society into a peasant and property class society with themselves as the upper class. These people, the people who are caring, the people that would go back and ask the 10-year-old what they wanted for their birthday, the people that did all the producing, they kept having to work more and more hours. First the husband worked, then the husband and the wife had to work, and now they've institutionalized teenagers back in the workplace. Let's go back. They could have drawn a line straight across here, and this line would represent God and country. This little gap up here represents the difference between tyranny and an average Joe. If I put, say, Henry Ford, the guy who built Ford Motor Company, he puts big American cars into our driveway. Well, he'll never be as rich as the guy who owns the factory and hires somebody else to invent everything and run everything. But he'll still be, a rather rich guy. I think of lawyers, those poor characters of criminal trial attorneys and prosecutors that defend the poor and the oppressed, not the guys today, but the guys a few years back. They didn't make nearly as much money as the guys who were real estate and tax attorneys and business attorneys. It was horrible. And so the tax attorney would be the guy up here. The criminal trial attorney would be here, and he'll make far more money than you or I, but he'll never be living in the foothills collecting rent from everybody. Now, just remember that if this criminal trial attorney is here, then these people down here, the ones who live in poverty, disappear. If you have home economics, the guys in poverty, the tenement, the guys who rent property, the guys who live in housing projects, they disappear. But so do these guys. These guys are called the enemy, and you have to defeat them. When these guys, the real estate attorneys and the business attorneys in our example, When they appear, the criminal trial attorneys and those characters, the guys that put you into your own business, they disappear, and these guys reappear. These guys live in the foothills, and these guys live in poverty. And they can call themselves communists, and they can call themselves fascists, call themselves anything they want. They're either tenement slumlords, or they're the bourgeois class that own the proletariat, the communists. They call themselves anything they want. To bum a phrase from the 1950s, they're the cruel, queer, atheistic communists and fascists. Yeah, they're a bunch of queer scoundrels. And it's a very natural thing, or it's a very hustling thing. The Catholics would refer to it as satanic. They call themselves intellectuals. The words that describe the same thing. We'll adopt that other nature. And over time, it's gotten horrible. I remember Dan Rather in the 1970s, he was a news guy, and they used to try and criticize him a lot for hustling, and didn't stop him. I was watching this show, the news, and once he stopped, he paused, he looked up, he smiled, and he said, "We're in a consumption society." And we had fallen into a consumption society. I had no clue what he meant, but I still remember it to this day. And over time, the people who were caring, the people who were courageous, brave, and strong, kind, compassionate, and just, they're the ones who I'm talking to. You're the gal that has a kid and says, "Okay, I'm going to be a mom around here," and you're struggling, and he's just looking up at you. So who's going to buy me food? Who's going to take me to the park? And that sort of thing. Well, you've got to speak. You were the one that were pushed out of society. You fall in line with the Catholic nun, and those three things that make up God and country: straightening up our emotions, willing the good of another person, and holding Christ's divinity as faith, doing everything because Christ rose on the third day. That computer cloud of electrons and emotions that line everything up. And that's you. And so you've got to hear this and pass a word and start chatting in along with the gal. How much money do you make? How much money does it cost to put your child in a daycare? I've listened to gals way past the point of tears saying, "I'm trying to work overtime and trying to get enough money just so I can pay childcare, just so I can watch somebody else raise my own child. I pick him up at the end of the day, and he take him home and he goes to sleep. I have no clue. They have no clue who I am." That's very real, and that's true. You could be, on the other hand, and that, just so it said, you could be living in the foothills because your parents or grandparents now got into gold and real estate, and you just collect rent and maybe have 4 or 5 abortions, and your child can go to the fanciest school and get the best education, and that too is true. It causes other people have to starve because of that, but it's true. To be honest, if you're a young girl and you're growing into this, you're growing into a world that's completely different. You could be in the upper class and be quite a scoundrel, or you could be in the upper class and be quite a decent person, in which case we're going to put you to work. Or you can be the lower class and be a scoundrel, or the lower class and to be a incredibly decent person, in which case we're going to have a sense of category. We're going to shift things around and get you, the person who's pretty decent, you get to have reparations, and we got to get you a paycheck. We have to get you a family budget. In the 1970s, there was a clear choice between money and malice. There are parameters of competition in everything, as we know from our anecdotes, and the parameters of competition then was a direct soldered connection between money and malice. You could get into all. You could be a professional consumer. You could get as much loans as you can, get into a duplex, start renting property out to as many people as you can, and but you had to have the emotion of being a malicious character. Hillary Clinton to me an example of someone with absolutely no sense of love in them, and she should hate Bill Clinton, her husband. He's a terrific example of the male guy who's quite a scoundrel, but they're married to each other, and that's what they have in common. They both love the Black Civil Rights Movement, and well, they should hate each other's guts, but they don't. And then you realize they're all in the same category. If I take a step back and arrange things along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil, then they're on the same side. They simply hustled. How about you? If you're a gal, and let's say you're a gal with two teenagers, what do you do? How do you make ends meet? And chances are good you can't. They say it's Great Britain usually is ahead of us. They're usually, in my school days, they would say they're about a decade or so ahead of the United States. The United States follows along with this stuff, about a decade behind them. And so you should be in terrible trouble. And you are. And so you've got to start grouping together. They always talk about reparations. Well, we're going to have and they're all a lot of nonsense. Just forget them. Don't listen to them. They just hustle. And all they want in the end is more for themselves. But not here. Here we're going to talk about reparations in the genuine sense. Maybe you can get some of those people who got into all the gold and real estate and turn things around, and they can start paying your family budget, and they better, or that kid doesn't stand a chance. You don't stand a chance. I'll remind ourselves of something else as well, that thanks to a guy named Adam Smith, who was a hotshot economist in Great Britain, and thanks to the Catholic Church that followed right along behind him and said, you have to practice virtues. This is just virtues. And then one notch out, you start using the phrase economics. If you specialize in labor, you can produce more than you consume. And if you finagle things right, that's how you start to get recreation time. And if you look at the gals, and this traditional is Catholic. Traditional is the 1950s American Yank. We weren't officially Catholic, but we were officially Yanks. And those guys were exceptionally good at it, and they reaped the benefits from it. The working life of a gal who takes on the profession of motherhood, including a house, you can just daydream. She works ungodly hours until the kids start to get in school, and then she gets to have some recreation time, and it's for her to play in those tennis tournaments they have on television. You have amateur tennis and professional citizenry, professional moms. And tennis is an example of how things flip-flop. Billie Jean King and those gals became professional tennis players, and it was so common for them to take male steroids so they could be at the top of the female class. It became a kind of joke. They also used cigarette commercials to sponsor their tournaments. And then you realize that they didn't discriminate for or against women. They discriminated in favor of women who were malicious, and gals who practiced virtues were just thrown out of society. It was a big thing at the time, and before that, to talk about tennis in terms of keeping tennis an amateur sport. And evidently, so many of them were fooling everyone. They were actually pros pretending to be amateurs. And so it was quite a debate, and it became one of the icons of the feminist movement. It was look at them, it's an absolute joke. You're the ones that should be playing in that tennis tournament. You'll never be as good at them, but you'll certainly have a much better society. We'll have a society where kids have shoes on their feet, and the citizenry are far more superior than theirs, and we'll have a huge middle class. That's the price we paid for the Virginia Slims female tennis tour, and Billie Jean King, and Harry the Hippie, and Al the Afro, and Donna the Feminist. Let's go back to you. What in the world do you do? If you're a guy, you don't ask how much money you make. You ask, how many hours do you have to work? I probably don't remember it correctly, but I think it was the average Joe made around $12,500 or something like that in around 1973. And on that income, he could afford a three-bedroom. He could afford to support a wife and 2.2 children. This house that I'm sitting in was built around 1950s. It's a house I grew up in, and our dad was a repairman. And in his salary, he could afford a three-bedroom brick house and a half-acre lot. 2 doors down was a milkman. Next door was a plumber. Up the street was a teacher. There was a gal whose husband worked in a feed store. You get the idea. They had built houses for each other. The plumber helped build the houses for them ourselves. They built the house for the doctors, and about a mile to your right was a neighborhood that used to be for doctors and lawyers, and they lived in a nicer house, but it's nothing that doesn't exist anymore. Now the doctors and lawyers live in the foothills, and they collect rent, and they rent the houses around here. You could see this neighborhood we use as an example. This neighborhood used to have a huge middle class, and you take your hand and push away. You're making money by making people better off, and that was thrown out. And you could just see it. I lived in it. There was a house a couple doors up, and they turned the garage into a sort of an apartment for the grandparents, and they had to get permission from everybody in the neighborhood to do it. And it was promptly sold to some guy who gave it to his daughter and turned it into a rental. And that was the beginning. That was decades ago. Around the corner, up the street, was a guy who bought a house for his child to go to college. The university's just down the street. And his cousin, Deacon Cini, was the guy who built the neighborhood. Deacon Cini's son was a senator for decades here in Arizona. And that was the start of the lazy V, the letter V on its side. Instead of building a house to live in, they would buy the house and they would let their son stay in it or to go to college, and then they would sell it. And the very act of doing that caused the amount of houses you had, caused the price of the house to go up, and they could just sell it at the end. So they intentionally caused the prices of houses to go up. They sold it at the end. They made money, but everybody else had to pay. If you were living in this neighborhood, you had to pay more in taxes. You had to pay more in this and that, and your ability to stay in that house disappeared. People started having to rent. They fell out of the mainstream. In other words, the middle class disappeared. It gets worse than that. Then you could see people buying the houses and then renting them out and turning them to rentals. Then you could see people buying a house and building another house in the backyard, so they would have more houses, more rental income, and they started to move into the foothills. And you can see that gap get larger and larger very physically. There's a house that they were building houses that were actually apartments, but they would have 5 or 7 bedrooms and that sort of thing. There's one right behind us, and there's a little balcony that looks right into our backyard, and it can completely trash the place. It was built as a rental, but officially it was considered a house, and nobody could do anything about it. Even though this is the United States, and this is the very definition of what defines the bad guy as a bad guy, there was nothing they could do about it. I remember taking a mom of mine, because she was alive at the time, to a city council meeting, and there was a neighborhood group, and they were complaining about these guys, and nobody could do anything about it. Even if you said they threw out the most fundamental of fundamentals, they threw out a normal supply and demand curve. They changed things into a peasant and property class society. They turned this neighborhood into an income producing thing instead of a house a, a place to live in. And yep, that's true. They did that. In order for them to do that, the courts had to change. And to ramble a bit in the good sense of the word, it'll go all the way back to the 1970s when courts came out and said, we decided there would be no religion in government. And when they did that, they threw out those three things that make up God and country. Home economics is the application of it. They threw out being a good citizen. They threw out straightening up our emotions. They threw out the idea of willing the good of another person, arranging the parameters of competition so that you make money by putting somebody else in their own business. You arrange the parameters of competition so that the guy who puts you in your own business makes more money than the guy who puts you in an owner-operated franchise, and he makes more money than the guy who who gets guys to invest in his franchises. In fact, they don't exist. They're the bad guys. They go out of business. And so what happened? What happened is a lot of people are living in poverty. I never in my wildest dreams could imagine that there would be homeless running around here. There's homeless everywhere in the United States, in the neighborhood. A few months back was the first time I saw somebody on a sidewalk that I used to run around to as a kid, standing there in the middle of the sidewalk, bent over at the waist. I'm sure he was on drugs, the stuff they talk about on TV. Oh, well, there you go. There's still a neighborhood with a young couple pushing a cart. As a matter of fact, the reason I tried to get this live podcast at regular times, and I found I have problems. And the reason I have problems is I'm doing so much babysitting of toddlers. And the reason I'm doing so much babysitting is because I have relatives who are single moms and even moms that have husbands or boyfriends that live together, and their incomes they can't do it. They can't come up with another $700 or $800 a month rent for childcare. And it just isn't working out. That's enough. There was a revolution in the 70s, and they completely changed our society. In fact, they threw bombs in the street and in order to get what they wanted, and they did. They push us into consumption society, so one of us is committing treason and the other isn't. And the ones who are the bad guys won, and it's as simple as that. So if you hear this, we've been on for about a half hour now. And so if you hear this, or you happen to know of a single mother or a guy who's trying to get the kids raised, you have to speak up. We have to form our own group. This is not to sound like I know what I'm doing, but this is the one thing I spent so much time. It's the one thing I can talk about with a sense of certitude. And so it's a 4-step process. It involves you speaking up. This is ridiculous. My children can't come across with a paycheck. I need the household budget, and that's that. We'll start having reparations in our sense of the word. I'm sure the head of the department, the law school here at the U of A, or University of Arizona, or the business college, or the feminist studies, I'm sure they won't mind a bit forking over their paychecks and any rental property they got into to rent property out to other people, or investing into food franchises and institutionalizing teenagers back in the workplace. And I'm sure they don't mind not having children. I'm sure they didn't have children, right? Yeah, right. And they can go and form a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused, and you can get the budget, and you can get the next generation of children raised. And quite frankly, you can go play in that silly tennis tournament at the country club they have, and that's what has to happen around here. Otherwise, very, very bad things are going to happen. Well, I hope you join our gang in the playground. It's been about a week of podcasts, so go spread the word and start getting the gals to chime in, and we'll start putting numbers to this. And enough is enough, and then we can do something about it. 4-step process. First, publicize a sense of original sin. they, you and I will start shaking and shivering and attacking each other. And so you have to get over that. It's very easy to put a priest on one side and a pimp on the other. And the priest says, say what you mean and mean what you say. And the pimp knows how to manipulate and intimidate people. And personally, psychologically, sex is just so easy. Fantasize about the gals, then do it again, only this time you place those fantasies in the idea of getting the gal pregnant. Have all the pornography you want, just so long as it's the cutie pie gal that's the mother on the TV show Father Knows Best and those sorts of things, that you get to make the nudie films if you're going to get the kids raised. And there you go. And that's step one. The other steps, the 3 steps, you all go together. We did have a revolution in this country, and one of us committed treason, and it's not this camp. So you go to this, I'm sure the Supreme Court will turn around and adopt God and country, institutionalize the Apostles' Creed in a very shop manualish fashion. And then that would be phase 1. Phase 2, have our own reparations. You pretend there's a ladder in front of you and take the ladder and turn it right side up. You go find the real estate attorneys and tax attorneys, and you take their investments away from them and up in the foothills. Then you don't stop there. You find the poor slob of a criminal defense attorney and tries to defend the poor and the oppressed, and he gets to live in the doctor's lawyer's house, and he gets to play in that silly tennis tournament and take Wednesdays off. I insist on it, and I insist on it at the point of violence. That's this is actually the most violent position you can take. Christ took the most violent position you can take. Didn't know that. And that's phase 2. You take the ladder and turn it right side up. And then phase 3, you build man build. You pretend that you picture a 1950s American house. You go off to the side and start with farming and mining and manufacturing and wholesale, retail and repair, retirement, education, and recreation. And then you start favoring the guys. You put the guy who can farm out in the farm and you support him. You find Henry Ford who can build a big American car and put it in the driveway, and you insist he lives in the mansion and that sort of thing. Well, I hope you pass the word, and I hope you start chiming in and being bossy. It's up to you. It won't happen unless you do something about it. Oh, excuse me. I've been trying to get this podcast on Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays now. Sundays at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Saturdays, 8 o'clock California time, 11 o'clock New York, and 4 o'clock Great Britain time. And I've been trying to get this on about 11 o'clock California on Fridays and Mondays, about 11 o'clock in the morning California time, 2 o'clock New York time, and 7 in the evening in Great Britain, to try and get you to rally. I'm having problems because I have to do so much babysitting. That's been a concern of mine. Well, I'll try to go on Facebook and those sorts of things, and you're just going to have to hear this and then speak up. I told you I get to be the boss, and the only way I get to be the boss is if I put you in charge, and you're just going to have to join the gang in the playground.